Okay, let's make sure this is going to work. Share. Whoops, wrong screen. Sorry, try again. Share screen. I want that one this time. Share. Who's that? Can you all see a fairly bland blue background?
Yeah, looks good.
Good. Right, let's start things off. Now you see a bland black background. Okay. So first off, thanks for having me. It's nice to be giving a talk again for the first time in, gosh, probably a year. I'm Dave Wilson. I recognize some of the names in the participant list, and I don't recognize others. So if you have met me, hi, it's nice to see you again. If we haven't met, then it's nice to see you the first time. As you can probably tell, I'm not from these parts originally. I hail from Scotland, although as of this year, I've actually lived in Texas longer than I lived in Scotland. So I guess I'm really Texan now after all. A few sort of housekeeping things. Because of the fact that I have this funny accent, some people have trouble understanding me at times. So if that happens, please shout. I am not at all offended if you want me to slow down or repeat things. It's perfectly okay. But I'd rather have you ask me to repeat something than have you be confused and not understand what's going on. Second, majority of this talk is not like a tutorial. It's a slideshow with me telling you stories on top of the pictures. I would love it if you could chip in, ask questions, just make it a conversation. That's great. Just unmute yourself. I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So if any questions they want to ask in chat, I'll try and answer those as I see them. What else should I be telling you? Landscape photography. Okay. I shoot a whole lot of different things. I'm basically a club photographer who's been doing this since my early teens. But the stuff that I'm most keen on is landscape because it involves me going on vacations most of the time. And over the last 10 years, I've been part of a group called North by Northwest. And this started off in 2012. Actually, it started off in 2008 with a group of us who were photo bloggers. And we used to interact in each other's blogs and we trade comments and we got to know each other online. And in 2012, a couple of us were chatting. Actually, Justin came to visit Austin. And I was saying, wouldn't it be nice if we could get the rest of these guys together and we all meet in person? He said, yeah, let's try and do that. So we decided to meet somewhere for a long weekend. We picked a hotel, picked a location, and all said, okay, we'll meet here, just get together and have fun, you know. And that's how it all started. This is our logo. It was designed by a lawyer, which probably explains why the graphic design is so awful. But we have a flag of this, and we take it with us, and we always take a group picture with the flag, or have done since 2015 or whenever the flag was made. But so North by Northwest is a group of a variable number of people. The smallest trip's been about 6, the largest has been about 12, 14, something like that. And we pick a location once a year, we go there, we shoot for 4 or 5 days, we make merry, we process pictures, we all get very depressed that our pictures are nothing like as good as everyone else's, even though they all feel the same way about mine. And then we go away and we stick them in our blogs for the next few months and plan next year's trip. So let me start. I'm going to go through these in order of the years we've done the trips now. We've been up to our 11th year, I think. This will be the 11th year. Our first get together was in Portland, Oregon. I don't really know why I would pick this, except that a couple of our members were on the West Coast and it seemed like a good place. And several of us had never actually been to Portland before. So we went to Portland. Here's the merry band for the first group. If any of you follow photo blogs, you might recognize some of the names here. The guy on the left is Justin Baylog. He was at the time an engineer. He's now a full-time professional photographer specializing in cycle racing photography or cycling photography. He's a cyclist himself and he follows cyclists doing advertising campaigns for bike companies and stuff. To his right in the black t-shirt is Jim Nix, who's from Austin. And you're probably going to know Jim if you know anything about Skyline software. Jim promotes their stuff pretty heavily online. Next to him is Brian Matiash, who is also a full-time professional photographer and educator now. Although, again, at the time we took this, he was still working in the software industry. Then Scott Wood is an engineer from Seattle, although at that point he was living in Arizona. Jacob Lucas is next to me, and he is now in Seattle as well. So that was a group of us, all of whom knew each other through blogging back in 2008-9 timeframe. Right. So landscapes, we always seem to shoot landscapes. We've never done a North by Northwest in a city yet, well, with one half exception, I suppose. This particular trip, one of the first places we went to was Cannon Beach and Ecola State Park on the Pacific coast. It was glorious out there. That's a fairly long telephoto lens shot looking along Cannon Beach towards the stacks near the town as the fog was rolling in over the hills. Cannon Beach on the evening, we tried to do some star photography and things on the beach that night, but the clouds rolled in and it wasn't so good. But we got some nice stuff with the sand. I'm not going to say too much about technique perhaps, but I like this picture because of the fact that there's some nice leading lines leading up to Haystack Rock. And also someone was nice enough to walk along the beach with bare feet just before we got there. So that gave us some nice tracks to look at. Here's another one from basically the same place, same time. That's a long exposure. How long is that? 30 seconds according to my Lightroom here. Not a fantastic picture, but I like the feel. It's very calm. We also went up the Columbia River Gorge, which was fun. This was only all done in 2 days, by the way. It was a very short trip, our first one. Did some of the waterfalls up there. And a fabulous location I'd not seen before is a place called the Women's Forum Vista. This is an old building out on a promontory above the gorge, and that's actually an color infrared picture. It was very hazy when we were there, so some of the long range shots weren't really great. That was also in the middle of the day, so the light was terrible. But the location was good. Infrared's great when the light's terrible. That's something I like. We, like most landscape photographers, we'll go out first thing in the morning for sunrise, last thing at night for sunset. In the middle of the day, we typically would go and eat, drink, make merry, and process pictures. But if you've got an infrared camera, you can go out and shoot great pictures in the middle of the day, because that's, to my mind, the best time to shoot infrared. So it works out quite well for that. Okay, so another place we went, which was glorious, was the Portland Japanese Garden. And if you haven't been there, and if you ever end up in Portland, you have to go. It's absolutely gorgeous. So we took some beautiful serene pictures there. This is one of the waterfalls. Here's an interesting shot. So who recognizes this tree? I expect at least half of you to put your hands up. I can't actually see everybody. But if you follow a very successful, monetarily successful photographer called Peter Like, he has a print called The Tree of Life, which you'll see everywhere. It's really, you'll recognize it if you see it. And it's this tree. And I'd seen this picture for years and thought this was some massive tree. And do you know how big this thing is? No. This tree is about 3 feet tall. And to take that picture, you've got to lie on the ground, get underneath it, and shoot through this tiny gap. But it's this tiny little tree. I mean, it's a gorgeous tree. It's a Japanese acer, I think. Is that right? Or maple? I can't remember which. But it's a gorgeous tree, beautiful color, but it's absolutely tiny. It's basically a shrub. So when you see these other pictures, it shows how easy it is to pull the wool over people's eyes with photography. So, and that was the final location, and probably my favorite place to visit on this trip. Absolutely glorious view of Mountain Hood from Trillium Lake, and I don't think it's a national park, it's a state park or something close enough, east of Portland. And that was a beautiful night, except for the mosquitoes, which were horrendous, but you can't see them in the picture. So there you go. So that was our first year. We had to have 6 people on that trip. It was a lot of fun, and we decided we'd get together and do it again. So the next year, we picked something different. We went to Moab in Utah. If you haven't been to Moab in that area, it's stunning. I mean, it's probably my favorite area for landscape photography. The views are amazing, as you'll see in a minute or two. And this is the group we had on the second year. People who you might be aware of. The guy on the far left is Bob Lucier. He was one of the HDR people back in 2008, 2009, when HDR was all super famous, super popular. So he and I got to know each other through that circle. He made a name for himself taking pictures of industrial scenery in the far northeast, up in Boston area where he lives. The guy on the right there of him in the camel top is Mike Criswell. And if you ever happen to look for humorous pictures online, he goes by the name Theatre Whiz, and he has a series of pictures of his wife called the Empress series, which I would highly encourage you to look at. They're hilarious. The setup portraits, very stylized, really funny. So he's a good bloke to get to know as well. Then we've got Mark Grabowski in the white. He's a lawyer from New York. And he was the guy who designed the flag. Rick Louie in front is a software engineer who also does photography workshops in Colorado. Justin again. Chris Nitz is from Ohio. He specializes in toy photography. He does a lot of really interesting stuff with small toys and large landscapes. I wish I had some of his stuff to show. It's actually pretty good. He's the one who'd always show up with model cars and stuff to stick on rocks and make these grand setup photographs of tiny toys. And then there's me. Right. So Moab is at the center of some of the most stunning national parks in the country. You've got Arches National Park and Canyonlands right next door, and there's also a bunch of state parks. And this one was taken just after sunrise at Dead Horse Point State Park, which you can see it is an incredible location. You're up in the top of the bluff looking over more layers of erosion than you can possibly imagine. And standing there waiting as the sun comes up and the light plays across the landscape, it's absolutely magical. We had to get up about, I think, by 4 a.m., maybe 3:30 to get out there in time for the sunrise. When were we there? Just check. I can't remember which month this was. This was in April. So it was late April, this trip. But a stunning place. We had that place to ourselves. There's practically nobody there because everyone else had gone here. This is Mesa Arch in Canyonlands National Park, I would guess. And there's a funny story here. Everyone takes pictures of Mesa Arch. I'm sure you've all seen it before. Everyone takes pictures and everyone goes at the same time for sunrise. And so we got there an hour before sunrise in the pitch black. And what you probably don't know if you've not been there is this thing is only 20 feet, maybe 25 feet across. It's not huge. And we arrived at 4 a.m. or something like that, and it's already a whole line of photographers taking up every available inch in front of this arch waiting for the sun to come up. So you kind of wiggle their way in, you have to find your 6 inches for your tripod and sit up there and wait and elbow people out of the way and generally get annoyed. And so the framing there is dictated 100% by the only place I could put my tripod, which didn't involve getting either other photographers or their tripods in my picture. I'd like to have taken a wider shot, which you'll see in a minute, but that's where I could be for sunrise. I mean, it's a glorious location, but it's one of these places that it's crowded, horribly crowded. Anyway, that's a picture I prefer, better taken from exactly the same spot with a 200mm lens rather than a 14mm lens. In fact, if we go back, you'll see that. Can you see my pointer? Does it show up on your shared screen? No? Yes? Okay. So that's the shot there. The next shot here. So personally, I prefer that picture, but if you go to the arch, you have to take the cliched shot of the arch with the sun reflecting off the rock below it up underneath the underside of the arch. What people don't tell you though is the minute the sun's risen, the minute it's gone over the horizon, well, okay, within 5 minutes, the place clears out. Everyone goes in, they get their one picture of the sun coming up and they leave. So the secret here is just to wait a wee while. So at this point, there's a point where the sun gets above the horizon. It gets above the gap between the arch and the horizon, and it's now at this point hiding behind the arch. And you can get the wide angle shot you wanted in the first place, albeit without the starburst in it. And if you want the starburst, you wait another half hour and the sun peaks over the top of the arch, and hey presto, you get a starburst in a different place, but every bit as good. So that's one of the tricks. One of the worst things about photographing national parks is the fact that they're full of these iconic views that everyone wants to take, and they are so busy at times. We've tended, as the years have gone on, to pick less national parky locations, if you like, more obscure locations that are still equally beautiful but out of the way. And in fact, at the last trip, we all promised not to tell anyone where the locations were because they were so good that we didn't want them to become popular. But we'll get to that later. So anyway, that's my preferred Mesa Arch shots, or the one before it with just the layers of landscape. Right. There's another shot taken the same morning on the way back from Mesa Arch. In fact, that was in Schaefer Point Overlook in Canyonlands again. It's on the road from Moab to the Mesa Arch trail. And that's a long lens shot, 230mm, which I've tinted blue to make it a bit more interesting, monochrome. And it shows Justin with his tripod set up taking a different shot out on the ledge. And then what's that, 7 or 8 layers of canyon behind them. And that's a kind of picture I love. Recession of tones, highly compressed, that does it for me. Okay, so on the way back, we flew in and out of Grand Junction, and we visited the Colorado National Monument at Grand Junction. Just as that, I know, we had some time to kill, we just drove through it. And it was pretty spectacular too. And I shot some HDRs there. This just gives you an idea of the landscape. It's not one of my favorite pictures from that day, but it shows you the vista. But this is one that I've thoroughly enjoyed since, this old cedar stump with the mesas in the background. I think that's probably one of my favorite pictures from this particular trip. Again, looking for interesting foreground with a fabulous background behind it. I'm a firm believer in having layers in your landscape pictures, whether it's recession of tone type stuff or this where you have an obvious foreground and things behind it, rather than just, mountains in the background. That doesn't work for me, I'm afraid. Okay, another picture that I thoroughly enjoy from that trip is this one. And in fact, you're not supposed to do this anymore. But that's Double Arch in Arches National Park, taken somewhere about 1 a.m. And we got there super late, and one of our number had one of these huge high intensity lanterns. And we all set up and we light painted the Double Arch. So all the light you see there is actually artificial light from a whopping great flashlight that we played all over the rock face for 30 seconds. And in that time, we picked up the nice color of the sky and some stars, and also get this weird and wonderful lighting on the archway. And I love that picture, but apparently now the National Park Service is not allowing people to light paint in parks. It seems a kind of shame, because we were there was no one else around. It was completely empty. But some people apparently don't like folks shining flashlights on the rocks, so no more. But anyway, that was a fantastic trip. So much so that we actually went back again last year, but again, we'll come back to that later.
I think the national parks are becoming more dark sky environments, so light painting would violate the dark skies.
I don't know, the skies are still pretty darn impressive out there. It would violate it as much as people's eyes. Yes, you would look in night vision. Yeah. So if there are people around, I definitely agree with you. If, however, you're in an out of the way place with no one else around, I could make an argument that said it's not going to do any harm. But that's for a discussion over coffee some other time, I think. So from the desert Southwest, we went to the opposite end of the country in 2014 and went to Acadia National Park in Maine for a completely different kind of photography. Again, still landscape, but totally different kind of place. And that's the group this year. As you see, I think this may have been one of our biggest years. Who would you recognize in there? There's a couple of names you might know. In the front there with the Nikon hanging around his neck, in the jeans in the middle is Scott Wyden-Kibowitz, if you know him. He's a pretty well-known blogger, does a lot of social media stuff. And to the right there, again, sitting on the rock, in the middle is Len Saltiel, who is a great landscape photographer. And you see a lot of his work on Facebook. And the rest are people who you've seen before. Oh no, Armando, third guy from the left. Armando is a full-time media producer from Denver, who does a lot of photography, but nowadays most of his work is doing drone production for advertisers and that kind of thing. He does a lot of drone work. He didn't bring a drone on this trip. This is really before the drone era, 2014, I suppose, but he has been since. Anyway, so we lug a whole bunch of heavy gear. I mean, this time I was shooting Nikons. I'd be carrying a 45-pound pack full of kit and tripods and everything. And one of my favorite pictures of that trip is this one. And that was taken with my point and shoot Fuji X20, which I also take just in case I see something cool when I'm not lugging the backpack. And that was outside the Airbnb house we rented, just lying on the ground, this wonderful leaf with these great little bubble water droplets on it. I kind of like that. So it just proves you don't have to take 48 pounds of gear to get a decent picture. I would debate whether that's a landscape shot, but I like it. Right, anyway, so to get into the more normal Acadia sort of pictures, here's one. This is Otter Cliffs, which again is another of these ludicrously busy locations for sunrise. We were there. This was even funnier than the last one. We were there again half an hour before the sun came up, probably. And you go down onto the beach and you set your tripod up and you wait. And it fills in, and there's a line of guys, probably 20 people lined up left to right along the beach here, waiting for the sun to come up. And what we'd failed to realize was that the tide was coming in. And as we were waiting, the water was creeping up and up and up and up. And no one was moving, because if anyone moved, you lost your space, you couldn't get a sight line, and you'd have a tripod in your shot. So we just stood there. And by the time I got this shot, the waves were lapping over the base of my tripod, and my boots were getting damp. But it's worth it. I mean, it's a great location, but again, everyone takes this picture. I'm still not entirely sure if I like the black and white version or the color version better. I mean, they're different frames, but the colors in that are lovely too, though. You can't see the fact that there was actually water around my feet at this point. So slightly less busy. This is the same area of the coast, an area called Thunder Hole. It's probably two miles away from Otter Cliffs. You'll see them in a minute when I turn around. Some fantastic rock formations over there. We spent a different morning at that location. Great rocks. Again, loads of layers in the picture, taking you into a gorgeous, gorgeous sunrise. Here's the same location looking the other way, and that's in fact Otter Cliffs. You can see in the background. So there's the first picture over here. And there's another one slightly different. This is pretty much the color. There was gorgeous golden light. It was an overcast morning, but the sun came up and peeked through a gap in the cloud just over the horizon and cast everything in this amazing red light. It was really glorious. That picture was actually run in Backpacker magazine. They were doing a feature on Acadia, and they asked me if they could use it. So it partly paid for my trip, a very small part of the trip. Another one, the same thing. I mean, most of this trip was rocks and shorelines. Okay, and so there's a theme building up here, I'm sure you can tell. This is Bass Harbor Rock Lighthouse. Again, an iconic view in Acadia National Park. And I said there were 20 people in the line at Otter Cliffs. There must have been 50 here. And people were actually getting into fights over it. It was actually, it's quite hilarious. People fighting over positions for the tripod to get this exact same shot. And the reason I'm showing it here is that one of our number, Chris Nitz, the guy who likes the pictures with the toys, he's great at doing different things. And while we were all lined up in this horseshoe shape, waiting for the sun to go down, he walked straight into the picture. And at this point, when I took this, Chris is actually hiding in here somewhere, taking a picture looking back at all the photographers taking pictures of the sunset. And he got some gorgeous pictures of silhouetted people against the rocks and all this kind of stuff, with no lighthouse whatsoever. But he ended up with better pictures than the rest of us and didn't have to put up with these crowds of people. The only thing he did have to put up with was people yelling at him to put his head down when they were trying to take the picture, and he was in the middle of it, but it was worth it. It was fun. Okay. There's a good ending picture, another of my recession of tones shots. That's in the top of Cadillac Mountain, where we visited one night for a sunset. I may have helped the color in that one a little bit, but it was still pretty spectacular. So that was another fabulous trip. So the following year, again, having gone West Coast, East Coast, we now zoomed back to the West Coast. And in 2015, we went to Pullman in Washington. You may not recognize Pullman so much, but if I tell you that's the Palouse area, you'll recognize that, I'm sure. I just realized there's some questions here I haven't actually seen yet. Yeah, using a low intensity light for the light painting might be something we should try. That was a 30-second exposure, so we could quite easily have gone longer. Going longer, we end up with star trails, so that could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you want, of course, but we'll see. Right, so Pullman, Washington is in the far eastern side of Washington State, a heavily agricultural area, and that's the crew that went this year. This is the first year we had our flag, as you can tell. Justin's holding it up there. The We35 flag is it was a project that Justin and Armando had on their blog. They had a blog called Photo Frontiers, and they had these exploration things where they had a whole year project of taking pictures with nothing but 35mm lens, and they encouraged other people to do the same and submit pictures taken with 35mm lenses. So that was their flag. That's basically the same crews we had the previous year. We picked up Steve Perlmutter in the red. He's a finance guy from Boston area who does a lot of photography and the coastline in the Northeast. And also Scott Starks is right behind him in the left sort of middle. He's from California. And that was one of the ramshackle old agricultural buildings that we found as we were driving around. Had to get a picture in front of that. We started off in this one in Seattle, in fact. We always fly in somewhere, obviously, meet there and then drive to where we're going. And we'd never done an actual city, but we had a day, or not a day, but half a day at least, an evening to shoot in Seattle. So we did some of the cliched stuff. And this was taken, I think, from Kerry Park. There's a classic view of Seattle from an elevated park in the city. You can see the downtown skyline with the Space Needle. So that's a 300mm lens from that location, just picking at the top of the Space Needle and the great clouds we had. You can argue that's not a landscape. I like it. I'll call it landscape. I'm happy with that. And then later that evening, we all headed out to 12th Avenue Bridge, which is just outside the city. That gives you a fantastic view of the interstate and the city skyline and the King Dome and various other, well, there's two stadiums down there now, I'm not sure. One's the King Dome, one's something else, I'm not sure. But it was great. We stood there for an hour or so as the sun went down. I was thinking about this shot. I think I cheated here. I think I had my camera set to tungsten white balance. If you do that in low light, it makes the sky look a whole lot bluer, and it can make for interesting effects. I'm not 100% sure of that. I know it's just set, my white balance is as shot, but I'm pretty sure I had this set for tungsten at the time. I probably merged several frames to make that one. Let's have a look. Yeah, I did. I don't think it's an HDR, but I'm pretty sure I mixed 3 or 4 pictures to get the best of the light trails on the road. Anyway, that was a good evening. So then we jumped in our cars the next day and we drove across the whole width of the state and ended up at Palouse Falls. And again, you probably recognize this location. We got there kind of late in the day and the lighting wasn't great and I wasn't feeling very inspired, but I got a decent infrared shot of the place. I found it very difficult to shoot here actually because it's so huge. It's one of these places that's really, really impressive when you're there looking at it, but trying to convey the sense of scale is really difficult in a single frame. So I'm not 100% happy with most of the pictures I took there, but this one's okay as an infrared. This is a color infrared taken with my old Nikon. And the way you make it is you take the infrared picture and the infrared raw files just look like orange messes. And you start by flipping the red and blue channels in Photoshop and that changes the color. And you've tweaked your white balance so that the greens come out kind of white. But by flipping the channels, you end up bringing the blues back, but all the greens become gold. So you get this weird kind of golden foliage with a blue sky. And it's kind of an interesting effect. And if you don't like the golden foliage, you can desaturate the yellows and the oranges and you get back to white. So you get the kind of pure white foliage with the blue sky, which also looks kind of impressive. So here's a more typical scene in our Palouse visit. The whole area is just wheat fields and farm buildings. But the landscape is gorgeous rolling hills. It's smooth rolling hills with gorgeous play of light across it, and then you get the stripes from the farm machinery going through the wheat, and it's a glorious, glorious place. I got some beautiful pictures here. It's relatively, I mean, it's rolling countryside. There's nothing particularly high anywhere except in one place. There is a single, I think it's a volcanic plug, large butte called Steptoe Butte. And everyone goes there because it gives you this enormous vista in 360 degrees rather, of the whole area. And you get there anytime, any morning or evening, and you'll get this incredible play of light across all these hills. So we actually visited it twice and just spent the time taking pictures of rolling countryside. We were there before the wheat was ready to harvest, so everything's still green, as you can see. But yeah, the play of the light across these hillocks is just fabulous, I think. That's what I particularly like. The pictures I like most from what they were taken with very long lenses. That's actually a 600mm picture. And using the super long lens compresses the hills to give you far more undulations, if you like, in the one frame. So that's a very, very heavily compressed picture. But I kind of like the effect. That's one of my favorite pictures from that particular trip. You'll actually see this little, I think it's a grain silo. You'll see it in a lot of pictures because it's the only recognizably large building within a couple of miles of Steptoe Butte. There's a few sheds and barns and stuff, but it's the only decent sized one with a good collection of rolling hills behind it. So a lot of people take pictures of it. This place wasn't busy. Unlike the national parks, we had this place more or less to ourselves. It was super. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. Sometimes my Lightroom goes bonkers when I move the mouse. Oh, okay. Right, so another location we went to that trip, which was great fun, was this place called the Weber House. It's an abandoned farmhouse. Again, heavily photographed. There were a couple of dozen people, or a dozen anyway, people there aside from our group. And again, the same thing happened. We got there just before sunset. There's another dozen people. They take their one picture at sunset and they race off. And we didn't, we waited. And that's actually an HDR shot of just before sunset, around about sunset. I switched, did some infrared. That's actually slightly earlier. And I loved the skies that day. They were glorious. The infrared really brings out the texture in the high cirrus clouds. I said it was, the wheat wasn't ripe yet, but with infrared, I can make it look ripe. So that same process that gave me my golden foliage before now gives me ripe wheat. It's great. So same shot. As I said, we waited for a long time, and we ended up light painting the farmhouse at night with the Milky Way behind it. This was my first attempt at Milky Way photography, and I'd have done a better job now, but I was still pretty happy with the way that one turned out back in 2015. So that was the Palouse. Next year again, we went from a relatively low agricultural scene to Grand Tetons National Park. And this, I think, is probably the most spectacular location I've ever been to. Grand Teton is unbelievably beautiful. The mountains are incredible. I mean, a large group this time. New people that year was John Day's third from the right. He teaches photo workshops in North Carolina. And everyone else, oh, Mike McClay in the middle. He's a software engineer from Colorado who does fall tours in Colorado, workshops for people, leaf peepers. Right, and Chris in the middle being Chris. Right, so one of the locations we went to twice actually again was Schwabacher Landing, which is very, very popular again. We found in Grand Teton it wasn't quite as busy here. I don't know why. I think we're there in October, is that right? Let me have a look. No, it was June. Okay, it was June this year. We must have been there at a time when it wasn't popular or something, because we had this place more or less to ourselves for sunrise a couple of mornings. Glorious, glassy, calm water. And there's another one from the same place, or just slightly upriver from it. Great reflections. There's a beaver dam up there as well. Okay. Then we go to the more cliched stuff. Back to infrared again. This is one of the molten barns. There's two barns about 200-300 yards apart with this amazing vista of the mountains behind them. We spent some time there. You'll have seen these before. This is a very well photographed scene. It's one of the 3 or 4 shots in Grand Teton that everyone tries to get. I did some more close-ups. I was trying to do something a bit different from the cliched pictures I've seen before, and this was one where I tried to do some close-ups. Actually, I've got another close-up. I don't know if I got it in this. No, I didn't put it in this slideshow. I've got another close-up which just is the peak of the barn and the peak of the mountain. They kind of mirror the shapes. I kind of like that, but I didn't put it in this show. So that's one of the barns. Another one was built by the brother. There's Thomas Moulton and John Moulton, and they built their barn just next door to each other essentially. And this is the second one. Again, amazing background, fairly long lens. That was a 100mm lens to compress the mountains into the foreground. Now, undoubtedly the most spectacular of the locations we went to, and the quietest, was a sunrise at Taggart Lake, which involves about a 1.5 mile hike up from the parking lot to this lake in a hollow in the hills. And we got there before the sun was rising, so it was dark. And we were there as the sun came up and the light just illuminated the whole place, and the lake was glassy calm, not a ripple in sight. This was actually taken as we were leaving. So this is, the lake was beginning to ripple at this point. That was taken when we arrived, and that's not me doing a mirror. That's it's an infrared panorama of the scene, and the reflection was that good. It was unbelievable that morning. So fantastic place. Thoroughly loved that. I got some great pictures that morning. So no one else there. There were like 6 of us there, and that was it. We had the whole place to ourselves. The next morning, we went to this place, and many of you will recognize Otter Bend, I expect. Oxbow Bend, or not Otter Bend, Oxbow Bend. Super cliched shot. because it's gorgeous. And this was another morning where you had to fight for tripod space. And I couldn't get the shot I wanted because we got there only an hour before sunrise and the place was completely mobbed already. So that tree on the left, I apologize for. If I'd had my way, I'd have been 10 yards to my right, but there was no space. So I had to put up with the fact I got a nasty tree on the left. Again, there's just before sunrise, actually, I think. The feel of that picture is one thing, and you wait half an hour, totally different photograph. The sun had risen, the light had fallen on the mountains in the background, and the feel of the place is completely different. I think that's exactly the same. Yeah, I hadn't moved my tripod, I just slewed the camera around a bit, changed the zoom slightly. But same location, half an hour apart, totally different feel. And if you want another totally different feel, we also had some weather when we were there. This is a rather aggressively processed black and white. I don't know if you can see it in zoom, but the level of noise in the sky is quite horrendous. But I like the feel of that picture. The storm rolled in and dumped a bunch of rain as we were coming back from a shoot. Thank goodness we didn't actually get wet. It happened in the car, but the skies were so impressive. We all jumped out of the car just as the rain ended and took a bunch of pictures to pick the super dark sky against the mountains. So that was a fantastic trip. We stayed in Jackson Hole in that case, which is a bit of a driveway, but not too far. It was a good place to stay. Right. So 2017 was a bit different. Normally we have one trip of the year, but in 2017, a few of us were chatting and a couple of guys said, look, we're looking for a weekend. Can we come down and visit you in Austin? I said, yeah, sure. So we had a mini North by Northwest in Austin. Actually, it happened twice because two of them came down in April and two more came down in July. And so as the host, it was my responsibility to take them around everywhere. I failed to mention, most of the places we go, one of the members of the group know well already. They plan the itinerary for us. So when Austin came up, obviously it was me to do it. So we did the usual stuff. This is mostly not landscapes, by the way, but the Capitol, obviously. Again, I've shot the Capitol for 20 odd years now, and I was fairly sure there were no new pictures I hadn't taken. But then you go there with somebody else who's never been there, and they find all these shots you've never seen. And I remember coming back, Mike Criswell was one of the guys here, and he was showing off his pictures. And I remember thinking, I've been there hundreds of times. I've never seen that angle shot. And he came up with some amazing pictures. But this is one I hadn't shot before, just playing with the fisheye. We also went down to Dripping Springs and hung out at Rippy's, which is a great old feed store, and got talking to locals and took some pictures of them, and they were good blokes. Of course, we went to 360 and took pictures of the bridge, which I'd never done before, which is again ridiculous given that I've been here since 1994. I'd never shot the Pennybacker Bridge from that location, so we did that. We went to Pedernales Falls, of course, great place if you want to do some landscape photography. It was a grey day, but that didn't matter. I did some long exposure stuff, and it was kind of fun. What wasn't so much fun was this is the only place I've ever broken a camera by dropping it off a tripod. I failed to do up the clip on my tripod, and my D810 crashed to the ground, and I actually it's still here. Oh, somewhere around about here, I've got the remains of it. A 28-200mm, which is complete. Oh, you probably can't see it because I'm sharing the screen. I'd completely destroyed 28-200mm lens because it landed on the rocks at Pedernales from 4 feet up. Thank goodness for insurance. That's the one and only time I've had to claim on my camera insurance. So the camera itself was okay. They had to replace the bayonet, it got bent, but it was fine after that. Another Pedernales one taken, I presume, before I broke the camera. Where else did we go? Oh, of course, yeah, more cliched stuff. Hamilton Pool. In the days when you could actually get underneath the overhang. Apparently it's shut now for, they're worried that the rock's unstable, I heard recently. So they won't let you underneath it. And of course, finally, this was the later trip, this was in July, Enchanted Rock. The guys who came down in April said they came back in July, but I don't think Mike was quite aware of what the temperatures are like in July. He's from Ohio, and he came down here. He wants to go and see Enchanted Rock. So we went up there on Friday about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we got out the car and we thought, oh, it's a bit warm. We started walking up the rock, and we got about a quarter of the mile up, and we both said, this was ridiculous. It was one of those days when the sun was baking the rock, and it was like being in an oven, literally. You know, sun was beating off the rock and reflecting back up, and it was just utterly horrible. So we spent the afternoon back in Fredericksburg drinking beer, and then ended up back out there for sunset. And we took this just before sunset when the temperature was a mere 95 or something, but slightly more manageable than the 110 or whatever it had been on the rock at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was fun. Many north by northwest. Our main trip for that year, however, was to New Hampshire, back on the East Coast again. Steve Perlmutter, who I mentioned earlier, who the financial guy from Boston, he knows this area well. He and Bob Lucier planned this trip. And so we started off in Boston, and I got an evening of shooting some of the Boston skyline sort of stuff. I actually picked my hotel that night. We were going to meet the next morning, and I picked my hotel specifically for its view. This is the Airport Marriott, is it, at Boston Logan? That looks right across the bay to the skyline. And that's pretty much the color of the sky. It was a really spectacular sunset that night. But then after this, we went off to do more classic landscape. And we headed up towards New Hampshire. And this was a place called, Franconia Notch State Park, which is a park that runs up the length of a road. It's a very thin park, maybe a mile wide perhaps by 30 or 40 miles long, I guess. And it runs along the side of a road basically, and you could nip off the main road at various points to see waterfalls and just generally beautiful scenery. But most of the time we've spent on the Cancamegus Highway, which is one of these classic viewpoint highways for full color. This was a pond we found. We weren't quite there at the peak of the color, unfortunately, but it was still pretty spectacular. Again, a lot of people think of landscape as vast, wide vistas, but this to me counts the landscape as well. This is a very narrow picture of a river reflecting the sun off the golden foliage on the other side. We didn't have much time here. We probably had half an hour. I could have spent all day just in this river because the color reflections of the water almost looks like someone dyed the water, but that's just a reflection. And I didn't do anything to that picture. It's essentially straight out of the camera. And there's another one, same thing again, different colored foliage in the bank with the sun hitting it, reflecting off the water. Lovely place. And it's all foliage and water in this trip. That was a waterfall called, looking at my notes here, Profile Falls. We went to on the way back. I like that picture a lot. I've actually got a canvas of that hanging in the house. That was on the way up Mount Washington, which is a fun day out. It's a rally, an uphill climb race track and zigzag track all the way up to the very top of this mountain with, they've recorded the coldest temperature in the continental US and the highest wind in the continental US, I think, at the top of this place in the weather station now. It's a fun day out. You start off in the forest, then you go up to the bald top of the mountain, it's all rock. And there's a funicular railway that runs up the whole thing as well, which could be kind of fun to take someday. Did some other things there as well. I quite like abstracts, and there's a lot of good stuff you can do with fall foliage just by moving your camera. I'm sure you've seen this kind of thing before, but that's what, 15th of a second exposure, and all you do is hold the camera and flick it upwards, point it at something that's got some reasonable sort of striping potential, and flick it upwards as you shoot the picture, and you get these interesting stripes. And depending on what you shoot at, you point at, you get very different effects. That's just two different chunks of trees with different colors and streaking. Another thing that's a lot of fun, if you haven't tried this before, is a zoom abstract, where you, again, pick a long shutter speed. In that case, it's a 10th of a second. You hold the camera, zoom lens, hold the camera by the zoom ring and turn the camera as you release the shutter. So by doing that, you're zooming in or zooming out, depending on which way your camera goes, as you take the picture, and you can get this swirl effect, which again works quite nicely with that super red fall foliage there. How are we doing for time? 8. Okay. The next year was another one very similar, actually, another fall foliage trip, this time to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and in Tennessee. And this was gorgeous too. A couple of our guys live in Knoxville, and so they were local, and again, they managed this trip for us. And that's our group. Jerry and Jim there. Jerry on the right, and Jim right in the middle. They're twins, and they're the guys who live in Knoxville and who are organizing this trip for us. everyone else has been on previous trips. And this whole trip was basically rivers and foliage again. Lots of long shutter speed washer stuff. This is a 2-second exposure. Very picturesque. Some slightly more different things, and that's one of the barns. There's various farmsteads and things around about the park you can go and visit. And this was the Noah Ogles cabin. I kind of liked framing things through the window there. Something a bit different perhaps. That's the same thing outside. Again, trying to get some layers, the foreground rocks with the cabin behind it. They also have a collection of little mills. I typically thought of mills as being large buildings, but this one here was about the size of a garden shed. The millstone itself was only 18 inches to 2 feet across. It's tiny, but big enough apparently. There's two of it. There's a bigger mill. That's the cable mill in Cades Cove. That's great to visit. It's still working. My only complaint here was that they've replaced a bunch of the woodwork just a week before we got there, so it's clean in the area around about the wheel. You can see it there in the background. Where's my mouse gone? I've lost my mouse. Yes, my mouse battery's died. Okay. The next year that was back to being the same colour as the rest of the mill, but we got there at the wrong time, I guess, for that. That was a very wet day, but that didn't necessarily mean the pictures were going to be bad. It made for some pretty atmospheric stuff. We had some sun coming through the mist and mist hanging in the trees, and it was actually quite an interesting morning, even though we all got soaked. There's another of the rivers and foliage pictures. I was always looking for something in the foreground again, you know, find a big rock or something with some leaves on it and try and position that in the composition so it leads the eye into the frame. Or some more detailed stuff. Another one much the same. And this one I kind of like. That's a longer lens looking up the river. And some more mucking around with the zoom lens. Again, different effect, same idea, different effect. And finally, the mountains. It was quite cold there. I think it was November or October we were there somewhere. Let's check again. That was November, yeah. And we were actually quite lucky. There was a brand new road called the Foothills Parkway, or a section of the Foothills Parkway that opened up the day we left. So we were the first people to drive on this road, and it's one of these roads perched alongside of the hill. And it goes along the hill and also along the ridge. And some of the views were glorious. We were the first people to drive it. So that was a lovely morning. Then we came home. Right. So again, change of scene for the next year. Up to this point, it had always been somewhere in the US. But the guys from the Northeast wanted to go to Canada, and we said, hey, why not? So we went to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island in 2019. And again, different kind of trip, but fabulous fun. Everyone there, there's one person there you might recognize. Right in the middle behind the flag is John Rogers, our very own local photographer. John's the only other, John and Jim next are the only two Austinites, apart from myself, who've been on trips. He joined us that year. So this was all fishing related stuff, you know, fishing boats, nets, coastal industry kind of things. This was a place called Blue Cove. I thought it was interesting that they built the fisherman's wharf on a little man-made island, so you can't get to it without a boat. I guess that keeps things in there safe. You can't get your average thief coming in and stealing stuff unless they've got a boat to go out to get to your wharf or your shed. Another one, same place, Blue Rocks. This is a place called Butelier's Cove, which is next to a very famous place called Peggy's Cove, which is a lighthouse that everyone goes to visit within Nova Scotia, apparently. Again, some really fabulous old wooden fishermen's huts and wharfs. And some newer ones as well, like this one, which had some great colour. The boat's called A Little Naughty, if you can read it, or if you can't read it. So it was kind of funny. Same again. Okay, so I mentioned Peggy's Cove. There's the lighthouse at Peggy's Cove. That was taken before sunrise. We got there really early, which is a good thing because this is a huge tourist attraction. And so we started there at maybe an hour before sunrise, and we took a bunch of pictures. This is a long exposure, I think. It's a 4-second exposure. We were taking, you know, up to 2-minute exposures when it's still dark and getting some good pictures. And walking around on the rocks, some fantastic rocks and rock pools, and interesting leading lines into the light. And that was great fun. And we stopped probably 8 o'clock, went into a little cafe there to get breakfast. By the time we came out, the place was full of tour buses, and hundreds of people had showed up to the lighthouse. So it does pay to get to these places super early and get a chance to take pictures without the crowds. Another place we went to, this is in Prince Edward Island now. The previous Peggy's Cove is in Nova Scotia, but we drove up to Prince Edward Island. And this is the little lighthouse in North Rustico. The lighthouses here are mostly kind of wooden structures, the small wooden lighthouses rather than the large cylindrical ones you see, like Peggy's Cove, for example. There's the Cove Harbour headlight, again on Prince Edward Island. Away from a lighthouse, this is the floating walkway at the Prince Edward Island National Park in Greenwich. That was a nice place. We went there for one of the sunsets, and it was lovely. Just stroll through the nature reserve. I think our best sunrise was New London Light on PEI. It was a gorgeous morning. The sun was just incredible. The sky just lit up. Again, I probably helped color out a little bit on this one, but it was really spectacular when we were there as well. That was the last of the lighthouses, but another place we visited, which was fascinating, was the Bay of Fundy and a park called Burnt Coat Point Park. And this is the point on the Earth's surface with the highest tidal spread. So the tide here, the difference in height from the sea level from the low tide to high tide is somewhere over 50 feet, 53 feet in the worst and best case. So when the tide's out, it's like a landscape from the moon. And you have these weird islands that are apparently way above the level of the seabed. But in fact, when this tide's in, they're sitting, the grass is essentially the edge of the water. So we wandered around the base of this, taking pictures of barnacle-covered rocks and things. We actually went back there twice. The first time we went, it was completely overcast and raining. It was horrible. But the location was so spectacular that we had to come back the next night when the weather was better and we got some better pictures. That was fascinating in that place. So that was 2019. 2020 happened and we were planning to go to Moab again. And then this blasted COVID came along. We had to cancel our trip. So we missed out on 2020, but we went back. So last year, we just pushed our trip back a year and we went to Moab again, but not quite the same place. Previous Moab trip, we'd gone there for national parks, essentially. This time we went to almost exclusively out of the way locations, which would not be busy. And it was honestly so much better because we weren't hassled by lines of tripods anymore. One of the places we did go to that was actually a park is Goblin Valley State Park near Hanksville. And this place is incredible. It's a bit like Bryce Canyon, you've seen that, only better, bigger, wider, more interesting hoodoos. And the other thing that's kind of cool there, unlike Texas, is you're allowed to fly your drones there. So if you go to the park, you pay your entrance to the park. If you pay an extra, I think it's $5 or $10, you get a drone license for the day and you can fly your drone. So I spent a lot of time there taking aerial pictures and abstracts and weird stuff of the park. And this is actually a fairly standard landscape leading up, this was at sunrise, leading up to the mountains in the background. But it was a fantastic place. And some of the drone pictures I took, I really, really like. Most of the best ones are actually looking straight down with weird patterns, kind of abstract images. But I also took pictures from the ground as well. Lots of really interesting stuff with these big rocks and hoodoos. It was lovely light that night as well. So another place we went was a butte called Factory Butte outside Hanksville. And this was amazingly spectacular. The whole area around about there is just erosion patterns, but they are incredible. The colors vary from place to place. This area is predominantly gray. Other places are predominantly brown. And it's just a truly Martian landscape. So much so, in fact, that NASA have a Martian rover research facility about a mile from this location. And they use it for testing the rovers in a Mars-like environment, apparently. This was just the base of the mesa, the base of the butte, rather, showing some of the triangular kind of erosion patterns, taken with a very long lens. Oh, it's 186 millimeters, but by this time I'd moved to Olympus, so that's more like a 370 millimeter lens. there's the Butte, again, drone picture, just as the sun was peeking up above the horizon with incredibly strong side light. Actually, I should go back. That was taken before sunrise. So the light's very directional, but pretty soft. And I really like that effect. When I went and when I knew I was going to go to this place, I thought that's the picture I would like best. You know, when you get the ridges with the tiny little sliver of light running along them. But I find that too harsh, actually. I didn't like that as much as the other one. So if I was going back, I'd probably fly the drone before the sun got over the horizon so I could get the same kind of light from that elevated position. But it's still a very spectacular location. Another place we went to was only about a couple of miles from there. It's a place called Skyline Drive, which is pretty remote. I mean, all of these places are up long dirt roads. You wouldn't want to take an ordinary car up them. You'd have to have a 4x4. And this one was incredible. All these bizarre, eroded, but soft erosion patterns in the base underneath the mesa. And you're standing on the top of the mesa looking down into it. And this was essentially the middle of nowhere. So we were rather amazed when we arrived there to discover a fashion shoot going on at the same location, middle of nowhere. There's a caravan, model, stylist, photographer, taking pictures of this gala at the promontory. And what you can't see there is 2 feet away, you know, the backside of that promontory is an 800-foot drop straight down. And I'm sure she was not happy standing where she was. I certainly would have been distinctly unhappy. So it was fun to see though, but I can imagine that she was terrified. That was a great location. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm looking at the questions again. I've missed a couple. Critiques. Oh, sorry. Okay. Someone's asking if we do instruction or critiques or is all fellowship. We're a group of friends. There's no instruction because, well, it's a strange dynamic actually. Everyone thinks that everyone else in the group is better than them. I used to think, I'd look at everyone else's pictures and think, oh, I wish I was as good as these guys. And we were discussing over a beer a couple of years back. And I was just saying that, Bob, your pictures are always so much better than mine. He says, rubbish. I look at yours and think they're so much better than mine. And it turns out we all have this kind of mutual admiration thing going on where we like everyone else's pictures better than the ones we take. And I think that comes down to the fact that you just get annoyed when someone else has seen a picture you didn't see. So I think we're all equivalently experienced. I mean, some people are better at some things than others. Like Armando is an absolute Photoshop wizard. He actually won Kelby's Photoshop, what's the conference? He won the grand prize at Photoshop User Conference, whatever it's called, about 5 or 6 years ago with one of his pictures. He's that good at Photoshop. So we annoy Armando with Photoshop questions, but generally speaking, we're all at a similar kind of level in our photographic journey. We've all been shooting for 30 odd years, well, 30 years in some of our case anyway. And so we kind of play off each other. So it's not explicit instruction, but we learn from each other. Image critiques, yeah, heck, we look at each other's pictures all the time, and we're quite nasty to each other in some cases, but most of the time, everyone really thinks everyone else has shot really good pictures, so it's not negative at all, really. Barbara was asking, do I use blue filters to get such intense blue sky? No, I don't. I do occasionally use a polarizer, so this one is not polarized, but I use a polarizer sometimes, and I will underexpose to make the sky a bit bluer, Photoshop. And I also, in Lightroom, sometimes I'll reduce the luminance of the blue channel in Lightroom to just try and darken the sky a bit. But I don't use colored filters. Polarizers and neutral densities are the only filters I typically use these days. I've got a bunch of other older ones, weird and wonderful graduated and colored ones and stuff, but I hardly ever use them. So yeah, Vance is saying Photoshop World. I think, yeah, it's the competition at Photoshop World for Photoshop Guru or something was the one that Armando won. Okay, so anyway, I've only got a few more pictures left, 2 in fact, but this is one of my favorites from the trip to Moab. This is a place called Marlborough Point. And it's actually a location we tried to get to on the first Moab trip in 2013, but we couldn't find the track in the middle of the night. So we ended up going to Dead Horse Point instead. But it's right next to Dead Horse Point, maybe a mile east. But to get into it, you need to have a jacked up 4-wheel drive rock crawler, basically, because the road is essentially impassable to anything else. But it took us an hour or so to drive down this couple of miles to get to the point. but it was so worth it. The view up there with the spires leading out into the distance was absolutely glorious. And again, we were there for sunrise. We saw the sun creeping down the rocks and the light changing over the space of an hour. So it's a magical experience. And the last one is a drone shot I took outside Moab of the Colorado River. I'm fairly new to drone photography. I've had a drone for a few years, but I never used it seriously until this year. And this was the first trip I actually got pictures of anything other than downtown Austin that I think are really good. The drone, my new drone's an Air 2S, DJI Air 2S, and the camera in it is finally good enough to do good things with. So this is what I'm happy with. I love the light on the rock on the right, the side light and the striations on the rock and the overall feel of that. So that's my last picture from this year. And so that's pretty much all I have. I've got a list of my social media and web links there. If you want to see any more pictures from these locations, if you go to my website or my Instagram, you'll find, I post a picture every day and there's a bunch of stuff up there you can find to look at. And I think that's it. Someone else got a question. Rental car. Yes, you can rent 4x4s in Moab. They are not cheap, but you can. Yeah, you'd have to do that. If you were just going there with an ordinary car, you could not take it to most of these locations. You'd want to get a Jeep or something with 4x4, and preferably a raised vehicle with extra ground clearance. But yeah, they're certainly not cheap, but it'd be worth it because some of these locations that you can only get to on the dirt roads are well worth visiting. So that's that. Can I answer any more questions? Or has everyone fallen asleep? I guess you've all fallen asleep. Fair enough then. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to show my pictures to you.
Oh, no, we're not done yet.
You're not done.
Okay, so this is Clay. You are a prolific photographer. I have, when I looked at your Instagram and your Flickr feed, and you're a very diverse photographer. So it's not just landscape, but do you find that landscape pays the bills? Is there a market for landscape, or is it just your enjoyment?
I didn't mention that at the beginning. I'm not a full-time professional. I write software for a living, and this is a hobby. Occasionally it's a hobby that pays, but it's never a hobby that quite pays enough to cover the expenses. I think I had 1 year when I broke even. That's not true, actually. As far as my accountant's concerned, I break even every year, but really, I spend more than I make. So this is for fun as much as anything else. I do other kinds of photography, mostly for fun. I mean, obviously I don't shoot much landscape around here very often. I mean, Pedernales Falls and things. Around here, I'm one of the photographers for the Longhorn Band, and that's my biggest gig, I suppose, these days, when football season's on. And I used to shoot for the high school, and basically I'll do a bunch of community event coverage for the local newspaper and that kind of thing as well. But what I'm doing is basically for fun. So nothing. This does not pay the bills, believe me. I sell practically nothing, unfortunately. There's a big difference between offering things for sale and actually selling them, as you probably know.
I enjoyed all of your photographs tonight. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And the background behind you, is that Austin?
Oh, hang on. I can't actually see which it is. I'm going to stop sharing now so I can see my own video. Yeah, the background behind me was taken from my drone downtown Austin last October, I believe. Yeah, if you're a drone person, Butler Park downtown Austin is an absolutely amazing place to fly. You can get some phenomenal skyline pictures from there, and it's perfectly legal and safe and all the rest of it. So that's one of my favorite downtown places to shoot. If you go down there, there's always 4 or 5 people flying drones taking pictures of the same skyline, but it's a fun place to go. Not as fun as Utah, but pretty good.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting and inspiring.
Yes.
Mark, you have some pictures.
I recognize that view that Stephen has behind him. You've been to Trillium Lake too, haven't you?
What's
Was
that?
that somebody else's picture? your background is Mount Hood from Trillium Lake, isn't it? Or is it Mount Rainier?
No, that's Mount Rainier Reflection
Okay.
Lake.
It looks very much like Trillium Lake in my Mount Hood picture earlier on. Yeah, I love that area. It's gorgeous up there. The Cascades are just incredible.
And Mark usually has as his background the arches picture with the sun.
I'm glad I didn't
But
have
not
it.
tonight. You're embarrassed to show the arches?
Yeah, when I went there, we had just enough people to fill up the arch, so I did a pano from inside the arch. And,
This is Mesa Arch, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
I mean,
very,
it's like a great location. It's just so busy, or it was when we were there. And we were there midweek. It was like a Wednesday morning or something. It was still packed.
well, yeah, you know, as you talk to people, and you know, your classic example, who have been to places over the years, and things have just in the last 5 to 10 years have changed dramatically in terms of access to some of these places, because like, you know, because of social media, everybody's heard about them and wants to get their own picture of those places, and the crowds are huge.
Yeah. Another time I saw that recently, I guess recently, was at Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona, which is a phenomenal place. And the first time I went there was back in 1990, I think, when I was it was 88. I just graduated college, and I was out visiting some relatives in Phoenix, and we did some touring around. And in those days, you could just walk anywhere. You could walk in amongst all the petrified logs and take any pictures you wanted. And I got some great stuff. So we went back. I recognize that picture. We went back with the family a couple of years back, and now it's utterly regulated. You can't go off the path at all, and it's all fenced in, and it was quite disappointing from a photography point of view, unfortunately. Yeah, I recognize that view. You must have been there at a different time of year, given where the sun is. The sun was about 30 degrees further around when we were there. So that must have been springtime or summer, was it?
It was cold is all I remember. We had on multiple layers, so it must have been spring.
I forgot. When did I say we were there? I can't remember. We move our trips around depending on what the local conditions are likely to be. That's nice. You've got the lovely reflection thing. The reason this arch is so popular, in case people don't know, is that it's got a kind of bowl-shaped, like almost a parabolic reflector of rock right below it. So when the sun hits it, it reflects the light straight up underneath the underside of the arch and gives you this incredible orange glow. It's really fantastic.
It's worth getting up for.
Yep. The other place actually, which was, I didn't mention, there was a Delicate Arch, if you've been there. And it, again, is spectacular. There's a massive bowl in the hills with this arch on one side of it. And we hiked up to that, and there were literally 200 people sitting around this bowl waiting for sunset, the Delicate Arch. And it was a disaster. Although, again, we waited till after the sunset, and we did some more light painting there. And if you're Kelby people, you'll know, we were down doing our own light painting. All of a sudden, a group of folks showed up, and it was Dave Black doing a light painting workshop.
Oh, Dave's good.
And he was, we got chatting with him, and he was great. We actually bumped into him twice in that trip. We were at a ghost town called Cisco, just, I think it's in the Colorado side of the border. So either it's on the Colorado-Utah border, an old decrepit village. And we were taking pictures there, and Dave Black shows up with his class. So it was as if he was following us around, but he was a really nice guy. He was very chatty and helpful.
I actually think I watched that class.
You may have done, yeah. So that was an example of a class I didn't like, though, because they all got there, they were all positioned underneath Delicate Arch, and Dave says, okay, put your camera in the tripod, point in this direction, set your exposure to X, set your aperture to Y. When I say go, open your shutter. And like everyone was just taking exactly the same picture. There was no, it wasn't an instruction so much as just do what I say and you'll get the great picture. I felt it was kind of cheating, but we still took advantage of his light painting, and we set our cameras up slightly different place and opened our shutter when he told us to, so that we could get the nice light painting as well. It felt a bit like production line photography workshop.
So as a segue, I was wondering, obviously the first step is getting to a great location, a great spot, and you've had guides, people who know the area, so that's a plus. Now that you're at the location, you've got your tripod, your camera gear, and you're getting out of the car, you're walking into it. the scene. And can you tell us consciously, kind of like, are you looking for certain things compositionally? Do you have, well, just can you review your process? What do you think?
It'll depend where it is, but I'm always looking for an interesting foreground as well as an interesting background. You know, there's nothing worse than a landscape picture that's like nothing, 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 nothing mountain. I want to see, like, if there's a lake, there'll be some rock and an rock outcrop, or there'll be a tree or a shrub or an old log or something that you can put in the foreground to lead people into the picture. And you want things in the background that get, you know, they're interesting as well. So you might have a promontory that's got some trees on it, and then you've got mountains behind that or whatever. So to me, it's all layers for the classic landscape. But I mean, generally looking for anything interesting and different. Then, of course, you've got to decide if it's vertical or landscape or portrait format, and what you want to crop in, what you want to crop out, whether you want to take details or the whole scene. And again, for most of these places, you're not trying to take a picture, you're trying to cover the scene. So you want to get some of the detail shots of particular, you know, plants or whatever, particular trees, close-ups of rock things, and then moving wider and wider until you get the whole scene. So just generally cover the whole thing, and eventually you'll find that there'll be one particular composition that just clicks and you love it. Yeah, I often find that when I'm starting off, the first maybe 10, 15 minutes will be kind of uninspiring, and I won't be getting pictures I'm happy with, and I'll be kind of unhappy. And then all of a sudden something will happen, you'll see something that works, and you just get into a kind of flow state, and that's you. Next hour is just solid exposures of minor variations of the same theme. That's something that really gets you excited. I'm thinking of the Taggart Lake, you know, the amazingly reflective lake up in the hills in Grand Tetons. The thing I remember being excited about there was particular rocks and the mist over them in the water with trees behind them. And I took so many pictures of trees with rocks in front of them, and the reflection of tree and the rock in the water, and a bit hundreds, probably published about 3 of them, but I shot hundreds at the time.
Are you working to frame the shot as it is, or do you kind of work on cropping it when you get home?
For these pictures, when I've got time, I'll try and frame in the camera. If I'm shooting events, I'll shoot and then crop later. I mean, I'll try and frame in the camera, but normally I'll have to crop later. But for landscapes, when you're sitting there and you've got time to think about the shot and the camera's in a tripod, then very much you want to frame it in the camera. You minimize the amount of work you have to do later, I suppose. It's a very different style of photography from, again, shooting an event or whatever. I mean, we go to these locations and you'll be there for 2-3 hours perhaps in the morning, and you might only shoot, I don't know, 50 exposures, 60 exposures in 3 hours. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm shooting an event, I'm probably shooting 600 exposures in 3 hours rather than 50 or 60. So I've got a lot more time to think about the shot, a lot more time to get the exposure dead right, or to bracket appropriately and think about how I'm going to merge things later if I'm doing a multi-exposure, that kind of thing.
Okay,
All right.
thank you so much.
Thank you again. It's been a pleasure talking to you all. And as I said before, I very much enjoy you guys' Instagram feed. There's some fantastic pictures on it. I don't know if you're just showing the competition winners or whatever, but they're really impressive.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We also want to offer you an honorary membership. Ed can get you the membership so that you can visit those pages on our blog, right, Ed? You do that?
Yeah, I'll send you the instructions on getting your membership.
That'd be great. Thank you. I might even come to some of your workshop things or your trips, because there's some good stuff going on.
Great.
The problem I have with photographers of Dripping Springs is they all have their workshops and trips midweek, which doesn't help those of us who actually have real jobs. So I can't go to very many of them, but I see most of yours are Saturdays, so I might join you sometime.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
There's
Thanks.
Georgetown this weekend.
Unfortunately, I'm doing robotics this weekend. I've got a mentor gig and it's competition season, so next 2 weeks I'm busy with programming robots, I'm afraid.
All right.
Actually, I'm not just programming robots, I'm the event photographer for the next robotics competition in Irving. So that's next weekend. The team goes to compete and I go and take pictures for the organizers.
Just make sure you don't program them for world domination.
No. We're not anywhere near world domination. We can't even dominate a 20 by 50 foot field. So I think we're okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they all say that. Next thing you know, they're sending killer robots from the future.
Oh, I can guarantee you there'll be no world domination with the guys who got programming this one. If they get it to drive, they're doing really well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the pictures of the robot adventure and the kids. The portraits were very nice.
Oh, right, that's last week's. Yeah, I find that often that the best pictures I take at these events are just headshot type portraits of people. I enjoy that kind of stuff. The pictures of the actual competition don't do it justice most of the time, so I'm always disappointed with those. But I like the portraits. So yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, wait another week, and there'll be a whole bunch more robotics pictures will pop up, I'm sure, from the event in Irving.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Thanks very much, David.
Yeah, thanks.
You're very welcome. Thank you all a lot.
Thanks,
see
Dave.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye then.
We'll see everybody April 7th.
Okay.